This video is from the very first day of our 2022 summer holiday. For the past 3 years we have taken Seabear with us for a week on the shores of Coniston Water in the Lake District. Our accommodation is at Sunnybank, where launching and recovery are extremely difficult for a boat this size, so at the start of the holiday, Seabear has to be launched from the public slipway at Coniston Village and sailed down the lake, and that is the task that I am undertaking here. As a fan of the Arthur Ransom books, I may never have learnt to sail without their influence. It seemed worthwhile to extend the sail slightly at either end to make it a bit of a Swallows and Amazons pilgrimage from Holly Howe to Wildcat Island. The white house in the middle of the picture now is Lanehead, and is a place where Arthur Ransom spent a great deal of time as a young adult. In 1903, after a chance meeting on the Coniston Fells with W.G. Collingwood, an artist and writer and former assistant to John Ruskin, Ransom was invited back to Lanehead and soon became a very close friend of the whole family. He often stayed with them and sailed on the lake in dinghies called Swallow and Jamrach. The eldest Collingwood girls, Dora and Barbara, were teenagers when Ransom first met them, and it has been suggested that they might have been part of the inspiration behind the Amazon pirates. Dora Collingwood later married Ernest Altenian and went to live in Syria. When the family came back to visit the Lake District in 1928, they stayed at Bankground Farm, the large farmhouse now visible at the top of the field above the boathouses, which became the model for Holly Howe. Ernest Altenian and Arthur Ransom bought 2 14-foot sailing dinghies for Ernest and Dora's children to sail that summer. One boat, which had a brown sail and a long, deep keel, was again called Swallow. The second, with a white sail and a centreboard, was called Mavis. The children's names were Tacky, Susie, Titty and Roger, plus baby Bridget, who was at that time a little too young to learn to sail. Sometimes the children would sail on this very patch of water, close by the boathouses, receiving instructions and advice and the odd cry of "Duffers" from their father and Ransom standing on the shore. Sometimes they would all sail down the lake to Peel Island for a picnic. That winter, before returning to Syria, the Altenians gave Ransom a pair of slippers, and he sat down to write a book in return, which would remind them of that happy summer in the lakes. That book, of course, became Swallows and Amazons, and the rest, as they say, is history. And so begins my sail down the lake into a fairly brisk southwesterly breeze. You might well be looking at the boat and thinking he could do with taking in a reef, and I think you would probably be right. Eventually, I do stop to take in a reef, as you shall see. I could give some excuses about the wind not being forecast to pick up quite as much as it did, but I think honestly the real truth is that while there's absolutely nothing better than having the kids on board Seabear, I was looking forward to having the boat to myself and being a little bit less conservative than usual. I rounded the rocks at the southern end of Peel Island about an hour and a half after leaving the jetty below Bankground Farm behind. I've trimmed the video down a little bit, but I've left in all the manoeuvres and a couple of points of interest along the way. I hope you enjoy it. You'll probably notice me checking my watch every now and again. It's not quite so much needing to know the exact time as being curious about Seabear's GPS speed, which for most of the trip was almost exactly 5 miles per hour, or about 4.5 knots, and that's both before and after taking in the reef. Ahead now is a truly classic Coniston scene, with the steam yacht Gondola gliding away from the jetty below Brantwood, the former home of the writer and philosopher John Ruskin. And there are more links with Arthur Ransom. Gondola was steaming up and down the lake when Ransom was enjoying his childhood summers at Nibthwaite, at the very foot of the lake. Ransom made friends with the skippers and was sometimes allowed to steer her. At the end of the summer, they would give him a farewell toot on Gondola's whistle. Later, Gondola would become one of 2 models for Captain Flint's houseboat, the other one being a similar yacht called Esperance, which is now at the Windermere Steamboat Museum. I'm not sure exactly when I decided that it would be a good idea to reef, but it must have been around this moment here, if not before, as I start to look around for a good place to beach sea bear. I can see that if I sail just a little bit further down the lake, I will be able to tack and land on the public bit of shoreline just below Torver Common. A bit of adjustment is needed here, as I realise I've hoisted the mainsail a little bit too high, so I'm letting the halyard down a few inches, and then, once it's made fast, pulling the downhaul on hard. It would probably have been worth considering keeping the jib furled, as you can see that even with the reef, Sea Bear is significantly overpowered. Probably the main reason why I didn't is that even just before I came ashore to reef, when Sea Bear had started to become a bit of a handful, she still felt quite balanced. I assumed that without the jib I would probably get quite a lot of weather helm. The Cornish Coble has a cleverly designed sloping mast step, which enables you to move the mast into its forward position for sailing without the jib, without having to move or adjust the shrouds. Maybe I should have thought about that, but even without moving the mast, sailing without the jib would definitely have been worth an experiment. Raising the centreboard halfway might have helped with the balance. What a pity none of this occurred to me at the time. As you can see, I'm getting quite a lot of lee helm in this gust, which is largely solved by easing the jib slightly, and eventually I get Sea Bear sailing fairly happily again. While I'm talking about Sea Bear, I should mention her name. She was given the name by a previous owner, and I think there's a good chance they were another Ransom fan, as Sea Bear is the name of the old Norwegian pilot cutter sailed by Captain Flint and the children in the last of the 12 books, Great Northern. And talking again of Arthur Ransom, there is another link almost dead ahead now. The house visible on the far side of the lake is called Deer Close, and as far as I know has no Ransom connection. However, just to the right of it, unfortunately hidden by trees, is the Heald, which is where Arthur and Evgenia Ransom lived during most of the Second World War. He wrote the Picts and the Martyrs during that time, and the Dog's Home can be found in the woods close by. By this point, the cloud has lifted just about enough for the top of the Old Man of Coniston to be visible. To Ransom fans, the Old Man of Coniston is Kanchenjunga. Ransom believed he may have been the youngest person ever on its summit, having been carried up there by his father when he was a baby. The ridge to its left is Dow Crag, and on its right are the fells around Wetherlam, which are riddled with old mine workings and are almost certainly the high tops setting for the 4th Lake District book, Pigeon Post. We're getting quite close to the island now, and the wind is becoming increasingly shifty as gaps between the hills above the western shore allow a more westerly breeze to mingle with the breeze that's being funneled straight up the lake. I'm starting to tack a bit more often, partly to keep the boat pointing in roughly the right direction as the wind shifts, and partly to stay away from the increasingly sheltered western shore. We are now heading straight towards the western shore of Peel Island. The rocks of the secret harbour, such an important part of Wildcat Island, are visible at the southern end. But how accurate is it to name Peel Island as Wildcat Island? Unlike his East Anglian settings of other books, Ransom's Lake District setting is quite different to reality. As we have just seen, I am claiming to be sailing from Holly Howe to Wildcat Island, but we have seen no Peak of Darien and no Houseboat Bay, although I suppose you could say we have seen the houseboat. Ransom's Lake combines features from Coniston Water and Windermere, and possibly beyond. Ransom himself said that every single place in those books exists somewhere, and in so doing he set his fans the challenge of finding them. Some have been pinned down beyond all reasonable doubt. Holly Howe, Kanchenjunga and the Secret Harbour are good examples of those, with the Secret Harbour ahead of us now probably being the crown jewel of all Ransom locations. The rest of the island, though, is slightly more controversial, largely because Ransom himself once named Blakeholme on Windermere as the island most used for Wildcat Island. But Blakeholme has no harbour, and is so close to the lake shore that it could not be sailed round even in Ransom's day. Furthermore, it is private, and landing on it is not currently allowed. Perhaps more importantly, although Ransom sailed on Windermere and landed on Blakeholme in the time immediately preceding the writing of Swallows and Amazons, it is on Peel Island that the vital memories which inspired the book were formed, both from his own childhood summers and that magical summer of 1928 with the Altunian family. He also referred to it as the best of islands, so when he said that Blakeholme was the island most used for Wildcat Island, I'm not sure he meant it. If you want to come to the Lake District and feel that you are on Wildcat Island, Peel Island has to be the place. We are now bearing away around the southern end of Peel Island. My apologies for not giving you a better view of it. I'm sailing around it the wrong way, both for the camera and for replicating the Swallow's first sail to the island. But time is pressing slightly, there is unpacking to do back at the cottage, and following the example of the Amazons in the race near the end of Swallowdale, I am sailing around it the quicker way. It is probably worth mentioning that when you are sailing between Peel Island and the eastern shore, there are a few rocks lurking close to the waterline in slightly unexpected places. The satellite image on Google Earth shows their locations quite well, but you do need to be a little bit careful sailing through here. It would be nice to end the video with a landing on Wildcat Island, but I'm sure I will get the chance to make another video in the future which will show the island more. For now, to make up for the fact that you're not getting a very good view at all, in fact really just watching me looking at the island, I will add a couple of photos I took of the island on calmer days to the end of this video. So, having had that last glimpse of the northeast corner of Peel Island, and with Kanchenjunga starting to come into view again in the distance, that seems like a good place to leave Seabear to sail across the lake with a whole week of the holiday still to go.